everyone. So I just finished working on my unit and lesson plans for Module 5, and I just wanted to talk about what I learned during all of this process because it was a lot of information, it was a lot of work to do, and it was really, really helpful. So I want to start with talking about my initial planning of the unit and how effective it was. My unit was a 10 lesson plan that was going to go over creating and analyzing media messages. And I broke it down into video, text messages, online and offline vectors, creative tools, and a bunch of other topics. You can see that on the next slide. And I feel that overall, the initial plan was pretty successful, with the exception of time. I hadn't really taken into account that 50 minutes per lesson wasn't really enough time to go over all the material that I wanted to cover. So after revising the unit plan for time, I had to think about revising the individual lessons, and actually receiving my placement information helped with that. I'm going to be teaching at a high school where they work on the block schedule. So instead of 50-minute lessons, classes are actually on a 90-minute lesson base. So I revised my lesson plans to be meant for a 90-minute class instead of a 50-minute class, which I think will enable me to go over all the discussion questions I wanted and do all of the lesson plan sections that I wanted to do. All of the activities and things like that. However, I did still revise the unit to have 2 free classes just in case it turned out that we were running behind schedule, and so we would have time to catch up on that. But the lessons as they stand in a 90-minute session I think would work just fine. So, insights. This whole process was hugely insightful, even going back into Module 4, which was selecting a standard and then unpacking it from there. Once you'd selected the standard and started to break it down into pieces, planning the unit was the next step, and then planning the individual lessons, and then going through the process of actually creating the materials you would need to teach the lesson and teaching the lesson. So we were going from this big idea further and further and further down until we had the actual specifics of a day-to-day class operation. And that was hugely useful when it came to visualizing how I would be teaching in the future. Major insights included planning ahead, beginning with the end in mind, because if you don't know what your standards are, I mean, you can't even begin to plan a lesson. You have no idea what you're going for. So starting from the large and moving to the small, I would say, is the big insight from this activity. So the parts of the unit plan I found that were critical were the actual lessons, and most important, the scaffolding of the lessons. How each lesson is going to build on the other until it all makes linear sense. You know, you can't jump ahead to creating something with your students unless they first understand the theoretical underpinnings of why they should be creating what you're asking them to create. So linear scaffolding, building on skills, making sense moving from one lesson to another, I think that was the most critical part of the unit plan. In addition, breaking down the 21st century skills. Which skills are most important to your unit? Are your kids learning to communicate, to cooperate, to create, to analyze, to discuss, or all of these things in various ways and in various lessons? So those 2 things, the scaffolding and the 21st century skills, I found were the most essential parts of the unit plan. So knowing how your students are meeting their goals is huge, and that's why we spent so long on formative and summative assessments. Now, most of the formative assessments I use during lessons 1 to 5 are discussion questions. So I can hear my students, I can listen to them talk, I can listen to their small group findings and figure out, okay, where are they missing information, where are they not making connections, and how can I help fill that need. However, I do also have some hands-on creative formative assessments that lead up into the final summative assessment. So I like the fact that when you have different formative assessments, you can see different kinds of students reacting in different ways. You might have a group that knocks it out of the park on theoretical discussions, but when it comes to actually building or creating something, well, maybe they struggle a bit. So is that a gap in understanding or knowledge, or is it a gap in technical skill? And how can I combine the students so that one student's theoretical knowledge can supplement another student's lack thereof, and that student's technical ability can help the other student with the theoretical knowledge achieve the goal of creating something meaningful out of their theory. So the interplay between the different kinds of formative assessments, I think, are key to understanding how well your students are progressing as far as achieving understanding of the material and being able to create and synthesize a project for themselves. Overall, in conclusion, I feel really positive about this unit. I didn't have to make any major changes. It was mostly just filling in for time, planning for extra lesson time, and thinking about how perhaps to get the students' technical abilities up to where they need to be in order to do the final summative assessment. But overall, I think that it has worked fairly smoothly, from unpacking the standard to creating the unit plan to creating the lesson plans to actually teaching. And receiving fellow teacher feedback on that was also very useful. Hearing how I sounded from an outsider's perspective was wonderful, and I really appreciated the time my cohort members spent on that for me. And I thought this whole process was very useful, and it has increased my confidence as to how well I can create a cohesive unit plan for my students.